The planet of Echelon stood as a beacon of human achievement, its towering cities a testament to their relentless ambition. But beneath the shining veneer lay the scars of conquest. Aliens across the galaxy whispered tales of human brutality, their worlds ravaged, their civilizations crushed. For Loa, the last of the Narans, those tales were more than mere stories. They were her memories, etched into her soul with every scream and every drop of blood shed by her people. Loa stood silently on her ship's bridge, staring out at the sprawling metropolis of Nuterra. Her eyes, once violet with life, now burned with a single purpose: revenge. Decades of preparation had led to this moment. She had crafted her disguise with meticulous precision, masking her alien features beneath layers of human flesh and adopting their customs and language until she could pass as one of them without question. The shuttle docked at Nuterra's primary spaceport, and Loa disembarked, blending seamlessly with the crowd. Humans swarmed around her, oblivious to the predator in their midst. She moved with purpose, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the customs checkpoint. "Purpose of visit?" the officer asked, his voice a bored monotone. "Business," she replied smoothly, handing over her forged identification. The officer barely glanced at it before waving her through. Loa allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. The next few weeks passed in a blur of carefully executed steps. Loa established herself as a biotech entrepreneur, quickly gaining the trust of those in power. She attended conferences, gave presentations, and charmed her way into the upper echelons of Nuterra's society. But behind her facade, she was gathering information, collecting DNA samples, and planning her next move. Her target was Darius Kane, a man whose influence extended far beyond his position as Deputy Director of Terran Intelligence. Kane was everything she needed in a pawn: intelligent, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He was also the perfect genetic match for her purposes. Loa met Kane at a biotech gala, their conversation laced with flirtation and veiled threats. By the end of the evening, she had secured a private dinner with him. And from there, it was only a matter of time before he fell into her trap. As Kane slept beside her, Loa placed a small device against her abdomen, feeling the soft peep that confirmed conception. Her revenge was almost complete. Soon, her child would be born, carrying the strength of both human and Naran blood. And when the time was right, she would use that child to cleanse the galaxy of the human scourge once and for all. Loa's relationship with Kane blossomed in the public eye, but behind closed doors, her mission grew darker and more complex. Every interaction with him brought her closer to the heart of Terran intelligence, where secrets lay buried under layers of deception. She found herself in meetings she never could have imagined, speaking with officials who controlled the fate of entire star systems. The days blended together as Loa perfected her role as a loving partner and dedicated professional. Kane seemed genuinely smitten, but she remained ever vigilant, never letting her guard down. Despite her growing influence, Loa knew that any misstep could unravel everything she had built. Her pregnancy advanced more quickly than she anticipated, a result of her alien physiology. She adapted, masking the changes with the same ease she had applied to her disguise. To the world, she was a glowing mother-to-be, eager to welcome her child into a life of luxury and power. But in her heart, she knew that this child was destined for a far greater purpose. As the weeks passed, Loa's network expanded, her influence spreading like a web across Nuterra. She began manipulating those around her, subtly steering them toward decisions that would benefit her in the long run. And all the while, she continued to gather genetic data, searching for the perfect combination of traits that would make her child unstoppable. But the more she succeeded, the more dangerous her mission became. Terran Intelligence was an organization built on suspicion, and Kane was no exception. Loa could sense his doubts growing, his questions becoming more pointed. He was starting to see through her facade, and she knew it was only a matter of time before he uncovered the truth. So, she accelerated her plans, pushing forward with a boldness she hadn't dared to show before. Loa began taking greater risks, knowing that every step brought her closer to the endgame. And when Cain finally confronted her, demanding answers to the questions that had been gnawing at him for weeks, she was ready. "Who are you really, Loa?" Cain asked, his voice low and dangerous. Loa met his gaze without flinching. "I am your worst nightmare," she replied calmly, her eyes burning with the cold fire of vengeance. The tension between Loa and Cain grew thicker with each passing day. Cain, ever the keen strategist, began to piece together the inconsistencies in Loa's story. His love for her, once genuine, was now tainted with suspicion. Every glance, every word, every touch felt like a test, an interrogation cloaked in the guise of affection. Loa knew that she had to tread carefully. Cain was too intelligent to be easily manipulated, and his position within Terran intelligence gave him access to resources that could expose her. She had to act quickly, but she couldn't afford to be reckless. One evening, as they sat together in their luxurious apartment, Cain broke the silence that had been hanging between them for days. "Loa, there's something I need to ask you," he said, his voice measured but laced with tension. She looked up, feigning surprise. "What is it, Darius?" Cain's gaze was intense, his blue eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. "I've been doing some digging, and there are things about you that don't add up. Your background, your connections, even your research. It's all too perfect." Loa's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I don't know who you really are," Cain replied, his tone sharp. "And until I do, I can't trust you." For a moment, Loa considered her options. She could try to continue the charade, but it was clear that Cain's suspicions were too strong. The time for subtlety had passed. It was time to reveal her true self and take control of the situation. She stood up slowly, her eyes locked on his. "You're right, Darius. You don't know who I am, but you're about to find out." In one fluid motion, Loa activated the genetic suppressor that had been hiding her true form. Her pale skin shifted to a deep blue, her pointed ears emerged from beneath her hair, and her violet eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Cain stared at her in shock, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon hidden in his jacket. But Loa was faster. She disarmed him with a single swift movement, pinning him against the wall. "I am Loa, last of the Narans," she hissed, her voice filled with the weight of her people's suffering. "And I am here to avenge my species." Cain struggled against her grip, but Loa's strength was far beyond that of a human. He looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of the woman he had once loved, but all he found was cold, unrelenting hatred. What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Loa smiled, a chilling expression devoid of warmth. "I'm going to finish what I started. And you, Darius Cain, are going to help me." Part 4. The Alliance. With Cain now fully aware of her true identity, Loa had no choice but to coerce him into cooperation. She knew that if he truly wanted to survive, he would have to betray his own people. But she also knew that his loyalty to humanity would not be so easily broken. Over the next few days, Loa and Cain engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. She used every tool at her disposal, threats, manipulation, even moments of vulnerability, to keep him under her control. But Cain was not a man to be easily swayed, and he resisted her at every turn. Yet, as the days passed and the weight of Loa's mission bore down on him, Cain began to see the cracks in the facade of Terran intelligence. The organization he had dedicated his life to was not the bastion of justice he had believed it to be. Instead, it was a machine of oppression, grinding down anyone who dared to stand in its way. It was this realization that finally broke Cain's resolve. He agreed to help Loa, but only on one condition: that she spare the innocent humans who had nothing to do with the genocide of her people. Loa considered his demand carefully. She had always viewed humanity as a monolith, an enemy to be eradicated. But Cain's plea forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. Not all humans were responsible for the atrocities committed against her people. Some were just as much victims of the system as she was. Reluctantly, Loa agreed to Kane's terms. Together, they began to formulate a plan that would strike at the heart of Terran intelligence without causing unnecessary collateral damage. Their alliance was fragile, built on a foundation of mutual distrust and shared desperation. But as they worked together, a strange understanding began to grow between them. Loa saw glimpses of the man Kane had once been, honorable, compassionate, and driven by a desire to protect those he cared about. And Kane, in turn, saw the depth of Loa's pain and the strength of her resolve. Despite the animosity that still simmered beneath the surface, they found themselves united by a common goal: to bring down the corrupt system that had destroyed so many lives. The alliance between Loa and Kane teetered on the edge of collapse, each of them walking a tightrope of suspicion. Loa's nights were restless, haunted by memories of her people's annihilation and the betrayal she feared could come at any moment. Meanwhile, Kane grappled with his conflicting emotions, his loyalty to humanity versus his growing understanding of Loa's plight. Their plan was audacious. Kane, using his high-ranking position, would sabotage key Terran intelligence operations from within, diverting attention away from Loa's true mission. Meanwhile, Loa would continue her genetic research, preparing to unleash a bioweapon that would target the descendants of those responsible for the Narans' genocide. But trust, or the lack thereof, was their constant shadow. Loa often wondered if Kane's cooperation was genuine, or just a ploy to buy time until he could turn the tables. Kane, on the other hand, questioned if Loa would truly honor their agreement to spare innocent lives. One evening, while they were finalizing the last stages of their plan, Kane hesitated, a rare moment of doubt crossing his face. "Loa, how do I know you won't betray me the moment that this is over?" Loa met his gaze, her violet eyes unreadable. "How do I know you won't do the same?" The silence between them was heavy, each waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, Loa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have no reason to trust you, Kane, but I'm not here for vengeance alone. If you help me, truly help me, I will honor our deal." Kane nodded slowly, though the doubt lingered. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll share the fate of those who destroyed my people," Loa replied coldly. The following days were a blur of action and deception. Kane played his part masterfully, feeding false information to his superiors and ensuring that Loa's movements went unnoticed. Meanwhile, Loa continued her work, perfecting the bioweapon that would ensure her people's legacy lived on, even if she didn't. But as the day of reckoning approached, tensions between them reached a breaking point. A single, careless word, a fleeting look, anything could shatter the fragile trust they had built. And in the end, it was Kane who made the first mistake. Late one night, Loa discovered a hidden communication device in their apartment. It was coded, transmitting signals to an unknown recipient. Her heart raced as she confronted Kane, the device clenched in her hand. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice icy with betrayal. Kane's face hardened, but he didn't deny it. "I had to keep a line open, in case things went wrong." Loa's fury flared. "So, you were planning to betray me all along?" Kane shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, I was preparing for the possibility that you would." The room was thick with tension as they stared each other down, both knowing that trust had been irreparably damaged. But before Loa could decide her next move, the situation took an unexpected turn. A sudden explosion rocked the building, the windows shattering as flames roared outside. Loa and Kane were thrown to the ground, the deafening sound of alarms filling the air. Terran intelligence had found them. Scrambling to her feet, Loa grabbed Kane, pulling him toward the emergency exit. "We need to go. Now." Kane hesitated for a split second before following her, the weight of their situation crashing down on him. They had no time to argue, no time to settle their differences. Their only chance of survival was to escape, and fast. As they fled through the chaos, dodging fire and debris, Loa couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their betrayal had come not from within, but from an external source. Someone else had found them, someone who knew more than either of them had anticipated. Loa and Kane's flight through the burning city was a desperate one. They moved with the instincts of hunted animals, every shadow a potential threat. The streets were filled with panic as civilians tried to escape the carnage, unaware of the deeper conflict unfolding in their midst. Loa led the way, her knowledge of Nuterra's underground networks guiding them through the chaos. Kane followed close behind, his face grim as he scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. They knew Terran intelligence wouldn't stop until they were captured or killed. Their destination was a safe house hidden deep within the underbelly of the city, a place Loa had prepared for just such an eventuality. But getting there was only the first challenge. They needed to regroup, rethink their plan, and figure out who had betrayed them. As they ducked into an abandoned alleyway, Kane finally spoke. "Who else knew about our plan?" Loa shook her head, her mind racing. "No one. I was careful." Kane frowned. "Then how did they find us?" Loa's expression hardened. "Someone must have been watching us, tracking our movements. It could be anyone. Another faction within Terran intelligence, a rival power, or someone who had their own agenda." Kane considered this, his mind working through the possibilities. "Then we're not just fighting Terran intelligence. We're up against something bigger." Loa nodded. "Which means we have to be even more careful. No more mistakes." They finally reached the safe house, a nondescript building nestled between towering skyscrapers. Inside, it was stocked with everything they needed: supplies, weapons, and most importantly, information. As they caught their breath, Loa activated the secure communications network she had set up. It didn't take long for her to find the source of the betrayal. The signals had been traced back to a rogue faction within Terran intelligence, one that had been operating in the shadows for years. They were a group of extremists who believed in the absolute dominance of humanity over all other species, willing to go to any lengths to achieve their goals, even if it meant destabilizing their own government. Kane's expression darkened as he read the reports. "I knew there were elements within the agency that were radical, but this..." Loa's voice was cold as she responded. "They're the ones who orchestrated the genocide of my people. And now they're trying to finish the job." For the first time, Kane fully understood the depth of the enemy they were facing. It wasn't just about Loa's revenge or his own survival. It was about stopping a threat that could bring the entire galaxy to its knees. "We have to stop them," Kane said, his voice firm. "Together." Loa met his gaze, and for the first time since their alliance began, she saw something she hadn't expected: genuine resolve. Kane wasn't just trying to protect his own interests anymore. He was committed to ending the threat posed by these extremists. And in that moment, she knew they had a chance. The safe house became their war room, the epicenter of their final stand against the extremist faction. Loa and Kane, once adversaries, now operated with a singular purpose: destroying the threat that had nearly torn the galaxy apart. Their first step was to disrupt the extremists' communication network, severing their lines of command and throwing their operations into chaos. Loa, using her vast knowledge of Terran technology, hacked into their systems, feeding false information and setting traps that would dismantle their infrastructure from within. Kane, with his insider knowledge, identified key targets for sabotage and led the charge on the ground. But time was running out. The extremists were ruthless, their attacks escalating as they realized they were under siege. Cities fell under their assaults, innocent lives lost in the crossfire. The galaxy teetered on the brink of all-out war. Kane and Loa knew that their only hope was to strike at the heart of the extremist operation, a heavily fortified base hidden within the deserts of a remote planet. It was there that the faction's leader, General Mathis, orchestrated his plans for total domination. The journey to the desert planet was fraught with danger. Kane and Loa, now a formidable team, fought off relentless attacks as they made their way toward the enemy stronghold. Their ship was battered, their resources dwindling, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. As they approached the planet, they could see the massive fortress rising from the sands, a testament to the extremists' power and arrogance. Loa, scanning the base's defenses, noted the overwhelming firepower arrayed against them. "This is suicide," Kane muttered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the battlefield. Loa's response was calm, almost serene. "We don't need to fight them head-on. Just get me close enough, and I'll do the rest." Kane didn't question her. He had come to trust Loa's brilliance, knowing that her plan was likely their only chance of survival. They landed their ship on the outskirts of the base, using the cover of a sandstorm to mask their approach. Inside the fortress, General Mathis watched the storm through reinforced glass, confident in his impending victory. The galaxy would soon be his, and nothing could stand in his way. Not the remnants of the Neran people, not the fragmented Terran intelligence, and certainly not a rogue agent and a traitorous alien. But Mathis underestimated the determination of those he sought to destroy. As Kane created a diversion, drawing the enemy's fire, Loa slipped into the heart of the fortress, her movements silent and precise. Her goal was the control center, where she would unleash the final phase of her plan, a virus that would cripple the extremists' systems and turn their weapons against them. The corridors of the fortress were a labyrinth of steel and concrete, but Loa moved with purpose, avoiding patrols and neutralizing guards with lethal efficiency. She reached the control center, her hands flying over the consoles as she uploaded the virus into the base's mainframe. Alarms blared as the virus took hold, systems shutting down and defenses collapsing. Loa could hear the chaos erupting throughout the fortress, but she remained focused, her eyes locked on the screen as she executed the final command. And then she heard it, a voice behind her. "Impressive," General Mathis said, his tone dripping with contempt. "But did you really think you could outsmart me?" Loa turned slowly, facing the man responsible for the annihilation of her people. Mathis stood at the entrance, flanked by armed guards, his eyes cold and calculating. "You should have stayed in the shadows where you belong, Neran," Mathis sneered. "Now you'll die along with the rest of your kind." Loa's grip tightened on the console, but she didn't flinch. "You're wrong, Mathis. My people will live on. And you'll be nothing more than a footnote in history." Mathis raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind him. Kane, bruised and bloodied from the battle outside, had fought his way to the control center just in time. Mathis fell to the ground, his expression frozen in shock. The guards hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Loa struck, taking them down with ruthless precision.